So that's what we did, what we do. And my background is computer science, although I haven't programmed in a long time, so you'll see some similar comparators here.
And you run a brewery, just so everybody understands.
I run a brewery. Yeah, that's right. Great company. So I figured we'd go through just the segments of product, market, and then what fit means. Some of this will be repetitive from the previous speakers, but you know and you guys sound like you talked a lot about products in the previous session, so I'll go quickly. A lot of times people feel like a product is a collection of features.
Is that Kayla's Modi watch?
It's the original Misfit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Crowdfunded.
Yeah.
Although venture funded before they were crowdfunded.
Wow.
Yeah. So you know, a product is not a collection of features, and I find that especially with software, where it's really easy to add features, people are just like, okay, that feature didn't work. Let's put another one in. Let's put another one in, and then that just usually fails. So really, the product to me is a promise and then a delivery or fulfillment of value, right? And so it's really important. You've probably been to numerous websites where you kind of feel like they promised you something, and you went through like a couple screens, and all of a sudden it's really clear that they lied to you, right? That you really aren't going to get what you want, and you couldn't hate them more, right? Because they just wasted 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes of your life. So alignment of the promise and the fulfillment is really important, right? So that's one thing on product that I wanted to mention. And we only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to keep really high level. The market, right? The market is a group of users, and it is really hard to know who your market really is. Like, you'll have a hypothesis about it, right? And Steve Blank is an amazing guy. Like, he knows the stuff cold. We hosted him at Beta Spring once for a couple-hour talk, and the man is brilliant. So, like, if you haven't read his stuff, it's easy to read it. Like, he's got tools out there. The stuff that he has put out there to make startups successful are just amazing. And what really struck me in hearing him speak was that it was so clear that most people that read his book just don't implement it properly, right? They do like 60% of it, and they don't do the really hard work in terms of talking to customers and really writing it down. So if you're doing this process and you don't have a spreadsheet in front of you and you're not keeping track of it, then you're not really doing it. But he's got a whole set of tools he's developed over the last few years that make the process much easier. So, you know, it's hard to know who your market really is, and you might have a really broad market, but you know, I like to really hone in when I talk to people about this, and it's really easy to understand segments, because going back to what Chris said, like, you need to know how to reach them, right? So if you can't break it into really small segments, even if they're just part of your larger market, then you can't come up with strategies and tactics to reach them. So, you know, figure out who your broad market is at the end of the day. Figure out who the couple beginning markets that you think, or segments of those markets that you think you'll really be able to reach and inspire early on, and then create real tests or plans and trying to reach those people. You know, value is when the market actually uses your product, right? And it's really hard. So one of the slides, it's hard to know who your true market really is. It's even harder to know how they're going to use your product. And so as you ask yourself, like, who is it that's really going to get the perceived benefit from using a product? Sometimes product doesn't provide any benefit. And I hate these types of products, but if you'll think about real estate seminars, right? People go to real estate seminars all day long, and they don't get any value from it. They get a high because they think they're learning something, but then they spend $5,000 for a weekend to go to a real estate seminar, and then they're like, oh, jazz, they know how to invest in real estate, they're going to make $1 million. They go home and they start playing Xbox, and they never do anything in real estate. A year goes by, and they're like, damn, I need to do something. So they spend another $5 grand. They go to another real estate seminar. Like, so the perceived benefit is that they're going to make money in real estate, but the actual benefit is zero, right? They just get a nice high for the weekend. But in real products, you're still going to need to know. Like, so here's a better example. So many years ago, I was part of a company that actually failed, but we had one interesting success, which is a site called the Rentometer. So Rentometer.com was a way we needed to get to our users. Our users were renters, and our users were small landlords. And it was really hard to reach the landlords who were paying us, because they were very small, they didn't talk to each other. So we came up with that hypothesis. We said, okay, we need to reach them, show them our products so they can actually use it. How are we going to do that? Landlords don't talk to other landlords, but they talk to renters, right? And renters talk to other renters. And so we said, okay, let's see if we can create a loop there. Well, so we said, well, what is a benefit that tenants really want that's kind of aligned with a landlord benefit? right amount for rent. And we kind of had an intuitive guess that that was going to be valuable, right? That people really wanted to know quickly, hey, am I getting a good deal here or am I not? And on the other side of the coin, landlords really needed to know, am I charging the right amount for rent? So we put together this site. We had some constraints we created for ourselves. One was it had to be built in 2 weeks because we knew that if it was too complex, then no one would ever try and use it. And we had a very specific promise, and that promise was if you gave us your address, the number of bedrooms in your house, and how much you're paying for rent, we would tell you if you were about that, right? And so we didn't have any data at all. So you say, well, like how do we actually fulfill that promise when we don't have any data? Well, what we ended up happening is that people put their units in and put their information in, and they'd get a screen that said, oh, we're sorry, we don't have enough information for your location yet, but come back in a week or two and then try again. And people, for some reason, felt that was okay, right? They didn't really hate us for that because it only took like 5 seconds for them to enter that information. And then in areas that had a lot of people, like New York, we only needed like 3 or 4 data points to start really showing value to the user. We would get that very quickly. And in places that didn't have a lot of users, it didn't matter because they didn't have a lot of users, so no one was going there anyway.
Right.
So we saw basically 3 days after we launched, we were covered by Lifehacker, and we saw 300,000 hits in a single day. And all of a sudden we had a massive data set that was enough to actually continue to create value. And then we started scraping Craigslist. Right? So that was one of the first unofficial scrapers of Craigslist. But in that sense, that's the difference between a perceived benefit, being able to deliver on the perceived benefit just enough not to alienate your users, to get data to then create a real benefit. And that part of the company, that marketing initiative went really well. So just one example. So if product and market equals value, I believe this is almost a binary test, right? So when you know it's true, you know it. However, and it's the difference between a trickle and a waterfall, but however, it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking it's true. And so even though it's a binary test, when you think it's true, when you have a couple users and they're really excited about your product, and you're gaining like 1 or 2 users a week or 3 users a week, it feels really good, right, in the very beginning. And it's easy to get stuck in this, oh, this is the way we need to go. You're adding a few more users here, a few more users there. But if you're not really adding users on a consumer site, or you're not really closing leads or getting to leads in an enterprise sale, then it's not true. And
So to that point, just, Nick, you had talked about almost daily metrics.
Yeah.
So you actually measuring day-over-day growth.
Yeah, day-over-day growth and day-over-day retention.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's
Yeah.
almost, and some of the companies that we have that now have millions of users,
Yeah.
They really, nobody cared about them until they had over 100,000 users. Even then, it was like, well, we only invest in companies that have like 40% month-over-month organic growth.
Yeah.
40%, right? That's 40,000 new users a month. Like, if you're doing that, you know it,
Yeah.
right? It's not 10,000 users here, 10,000 users there.
Yeah.
So there's another story I want to tell. So one of our mentors is in the finance industry, and going towards more of an enterprise story. And he had a company that helped banks like take applications online to transfer funds, like to open up a new bank account. And one of his best stories is that for the first couple of years, they would call people, and they would call people. It's a super complex product. They had a core customer that helped them build the first version of the product, and that's why their company worked.
Yeah.
Then they went to try and sell it, and they were doing okay, but they weren't doing great. And he had this realization that the communication of that value was not happening correctly. And he changed his sales pitch. Basically, within the first 30 seconds, he would say, we can help you open more bank accounts, right? Which is all banks care about, right? All they care about is capital that they have under management.
Yeah.
And the minute he did that, he said his callback rates went from 10% to 90% overnight. So he didn't have to change his product, he didn't have to do anything else. He just had to change his sales messaging. And I think that's particularly important for enterprise. It is still important for consumers, however.
Yeah.
And I feel that your product market fit is not just about your product, it's about how it's communicated. And many startups never get over the hurdle because they just can't communicate their product well. So, you guys have already talked about minimally viable products. I've seen a lot of people make this mistake that they try and do a minimally viable product, but they end up with a version 1 of their product, right, which takes 9 months to build and $750,000 their first observation was when they went into a house, they saw kids with diabetes taking care of their teddy bears. Right? No electronics, nothing. They were just playing, and through that play, they were coping with their condition. So they then went one step further and started essentially running simulations with these kids, or observing the kids with different teddy bears they had hacked together themselves, right, without having to spend a ton of money on the product until they really felt good. They have a great product for that market. There's a lot of challenges in that market, but they're doing fairly well. Resist the just one more feature thing. If you find yourself saying that week after week, then you're probably going down the wrong path. And then, of course, perfection is the enemy of good enough, is something that I see all the time. So some of the thought experiments that I have people go through when they're thinking about their product is, how is your product valuable for a single user? This is particularly apropos for today's world, where everyone understands the value of the network effect, and they can design companies that work really well once you have millions of users. It's just, of course, how do you get there? And you get there through your first user. How do you provide that value for the first user? If you can't answer that question, you probably shouldn't be building anything. And then, really understanding how that value grows as more users come into your product. And if you don't have a product that does grow when more users use it, think really hard about that, because that creates a barrier to entry and creates a very protectable company, and something you may want to do, especially in the software world. And then finally, the question I like to people ask is, how do you communicate that value to your users? Because if you can't communicate that value clearly, then
Any insights on how you facilitate, how you amplify getting your users to communicate between one another? Best practices from your portfolio of 90 countries.
So, I guess it would fall into two categories. So one where the value of the product itself is based on interaction with other users. So Splitwise is a great example of that, where it's expense sharing. Right. It's the value for single users. You can keep track of your expenses,
right.
and there may be other values there. But once you start adding your friends on, and they're using it with you, and you're splitting expenses with your friends or your roommates, and they had a really specific niche to start with, which was roommates.
Mm-hmm.
Splitting rent, splitting cable bills, splitting meals, and making that easier for them. That it's really clear the value. You're encouraged to add people, but if you look at Sprouts Health, which is a great example, there's no real value that 100 other users are using Teddy Bear, but the product experience is so great and so wonderful for the child, then you get a lot of evangelists of the product. So I think that, and I think that
Family to family evangelists.
Yeah, exactly, and they think very hard about. I think they're thinking very hard about how can they fit that in there, right?
Okay.
In different product categories. And that's really the end. I mean, it's quick, so.
That's cool. So what questions, I have a question for you about, data spring and your new intake, because I'm sure a lot of people would care. But what questions you have for Owen, right? Is the 90 and